Hello, this is Jim McKeeth with Embarcadero Technologies Developer Relations. Welcome to the CodeRage 8 session FireDAC overview for Delphi XE5. In this session, we're going to talk about what FireDAC is and the legacy of database connectivity that has led to FireDACs today. I'm talking about where you can use FireDAC, and then provide you an overview of FireDAC components and the architecture and how they work together to make FireDAC what it is. Lastly, we'll provide some usage examples and some demos of how you can use FireDAC. We'll also include some links to additional information on how you can learn more about FireDAC. So FireDAC is a universal data access library. It supports most all database management systems, SQL and relational databases. There's a collection of them over on the right there, not an exhaustive list. One thing to note is there's additional databases besides those, but even the databases that aren't included in the box, it's extensible and able to access additional databases as well. So very flexible. It's going to access most of the databases you need to access today. FireDAC has native Delphi drivers for all the platforms it supports. So that means there are not additional DLLs you need in addition to your application to access those databases. Now, if the database does have client drivers, for example, Oracle, then you would need those drivers installed. But then your application could run with just those drivers and not needing additional drivers specific to your application. FireDAC is a high-performance bidirectional access system. So it provides the robustness of bidirectional access, but also is very high performance. It provides a unified API across all the databases. So you use the same components to access all the databases it supports. But it also provides database-specific API features. So that means if a certain database has a feature you need to access, you can add an additional component that is specific to that database, and then it will give you access to that API feature. It supports both local or embedded or desktop databases and server databases, remote databases. So it's useful anywhere you're doing your Delphi application development and you need to access data. So the legacy of database connectivity that led to FireDAC, if you think back to the dawn of time or shortly after then, we had the Borland database engine, the BDE. Now, the BDE was a unified bidirectional database driver collection. It connected to multiple databases, all using the same components. It was a heavyweight deployment. There was a lot of setup that had to go into deploying a BDE installation, and sometimes that could lead to problems. There's more moving parts, if you will. In 2000, BDE was starting to show its age, so Delphi 6 introduced DB Express. DB Express was a high-performance system with numerous improvements over the BDE, but it was unidirectional, meaning that you could only move forward through a data set and you couldn't reverse through your direction. So they had a number of advantages over the BDE, but it was still, because of the limitation of being unidirectional, a couple other things, it still wasn't a complete replacement for the BDE. 2013, in Delphi XE3, FireDAC was introduced based on AnyDAC. FireDAC is a full, robust, like I said, bidirectional database system, as well as being high performance. So it takes all the features you needed from the BDE and DB Express and provides them to you in a single system. So it's a full replacement for everything that was provided through BDE and DB Express. So FireDAC is a native Delphi implementation. So it works anywhere you can do Delphi development. That means you can use it on the mobile devices to access mobile device databases like SQLite and InterBase to go or IBLite. You can use it on the server or desktop to access any databases available to you there. And you can also use it with DataSnap to provide DataSnap services that expose backend databases, enterprise databases. It works with both FireMonkey and VCL, and as well as anything else you could use it with console applications, maybe services, whatever. Wherever you want to use Delphi, you can use FireDAC. Now, in some of these situations, it doesn't make sense to have access to that database. For example, on a mobile device, your only databases you can use are SQLite and InterBase, these embedded databases. So you're not going to be able to use the SQL Server connection from mobile or the Oracle connection from mobile because that doesn't exist. There is no access to those databases from the mobile device. If you do want to access a database like that from a mobile device, that's where DataSnap comes in. With DataSnap, you would then use FireDAC with your DataSnap server to access your Oracle database. And then through DataSnap, you would expose that access to your mobile device or desktop or any device really for that matter. So in that situation, FireDAC does provide your mobile devices access to Oracle or other big databases through DataSnap. So let's take a look at the architecture that makes up FireDAC. We're going to start with the non-visible components. These are the queries, the connections, store procedures, etc. that are the core of your database application development. There's also in here included a memory table for in-memory dataset storage, as well as a scripting engine. So each dataset is caching as well, but if you want to have some sort of in-memory dataset, you can do that as well. Very flexible there. Next, let's look at the visible components and forms. This is a collection of user interface elements that you would use in your application. Now, this supports both FireMonkey and VCL, as well as some of them actually work with the console. So this includes examples like a login dialog or the wait cursor, error dialogues, etc. By including these components in your application, you then have access to these common user interface elements. So the local data storage is similar to ADO.NET's dataset and related objects, data tables, data rows, etc. It's an in-memory data engine which handles all client data and metadata. It has a flexible API and gives you that robustness you need in your application. The data adapter allows both automation and fine-tuning of a read operation with complex data sets like master details, nested data sets, and so on. And it also provides support for the posting of updates back to the database system. So it maintains change logs, etc. It's controlled mostly through tfield and update option properties on the data adapter. So the debugging and performance monitoring is one of these features that just really makes FireDAC very flexible. It gives you the ability to debug or log what's going on, the interface between your FireDAC application and the database management system. By including a component like flat file client link or remote client link, it takes that log information and stores it for you. So with the flat file, it stores it into a local file on your system, or the remote client link will actually connect through an IP address to a remote machine using the FireDAC monitor, FD monitor, in order to let you view that information for what's going on in there. There's also a custom client link you can use to create your own custom system using some other mechanism to log that information. The physical drivers are the core of FireDAC, or the heart of FireDAC, if you will. These are interfaces for physical data access. Each of these are implemented in their own package in Delphi code, and by including the specific component in your application, it links that driver into your system. So this is, like I said before, eliminates the need to deploy additional DLLs with your application in order to access the database. So none of these drivers are linked into your application by default. So if you just drop a connection down there, you're not going to have the driver for that database until you include the specific database driver, native driver component. Now, the bridging drivers are generic database DBMS access systems using like ODBC or DB Express. So this is where you can then access additional databases that maybe are not available through the native drivers, or if you want to make it pluggable with that system. So flexible option there is to be able to use the bridging drivers instead of the native drivers for your system. All of that together makes FireDAC the flexible system that it is for your database application development. So this is a list of the core components that make up FireDAC. The connection is what provides your connection to your database. Then you have your different data sets, which is your query, your store procedure, and your table or your memory table. And these are contain data, hold data that you can then work with the other systems. I will point out the TFD local SQL, which is the last one there on the right. It's a local SQL engine that allows you to work with local data sets as data sources. Very powerful way to work with your data. This is just makes FireDAC such a powerful system to work with. These are the FireDAC link components I mentioned before. Each of these components provides the drivers you need to access that specific database. So whether it be Firebird, InterBase, Access, SQL Server, etc. You just drop that component on your system, one or more of those, and it compiles into your application to give you access to that database. And like I said, because it's Delphi, it compiles to anything Delphi compiles to, whether it be Win32, Win64, ARM, or OS X. This is a list of the UI components that are available to you. If you fail to include one of these when you need it, for example, the weight cursor, you'll get an error similar to the one there. It says object factory for class, and it gives you some big GUID is missing. To register, you can drop component, and it tells you the component into your project. Most often, you're going to need weight cursor and possibly login dialog in most all applications. Let's look at a couple demos and examples of how to use FireDAC in action. Go ahead and build our first FireDAC application. We'll connect to SQL Server. SQL Server is not available for mobile, so let's go ahead and choose a desktop application. First thing we need is our FireDAC connection. This is what provides the connection to the database. And we can just double click on this and bring up the connection editor. This provides a nice graphical interface in order to build the connection parameters instead of just having to type those in there manually. So we're going to connect to SQL Server, and we can use the wizard to walk us through the rest of the process. So I'm going to specify a server name. This can be any server on the network. I'm going to use localhost because, well, it's a nice simple demo. And provide a username and password. So from here, I can select what database I want to connect to, if I want to connect to a specific database. So we're going to use the good old reliable Northwind database, and we're ready to go. So this has filled out the information here. We can edit this further if we need to. There's more options here, as well as a whole variety of options available to us here. We can go ahead and run a test and test our connection. So let's go ahead and say, OK, connection established successfully. And notice here on this one, we do have the option to use the operating system authentication, which is set up on SQL Server as well. Also here we have information. This lists some information about what we're using to connect to our database. Good information here to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. Nothing's hidden from you. Here's the driver that's provided by SQL Server that we're using to connect to the database. And let's go back here. So since we're using SQL Server, we're going to go ahead and add our SQL Server link, driver link here. So there it is, physical MySQL Server driver link. And that's all we have to do in order to link that into our application. So now we're going to, let's write a query. So we're going to put down a FireDAC query. Now this is something that's really cool here. It is actually automatically set up the connection for us. So we had one connection on there, put down a query, it automatically connected it to that query, or connected to that connection. So again, I can double click on this to bring up the query editor. And we can select star from customers and execute this query. And it's going to ask us once for credentials here. And there we go, there's the data. Now, if I don't want it to keep asking me every time, I can come in here to my connection and turn off the login prompt. So now I can execute it without getting a prompt for login. Execute, there's all of our customers. Now let's say we want to limit this by country. We can say where country equals And now we've only got countries of Mexico. Now, typically you don't write, inject your queries, your restrictions in here like this for something like that. So what you instead would want to do is a parameter. Now, if you notice I have a tab here called parameters, it's empty right now. But if I come back here and I say country is a parameter, and then I come here to the parameters tab, it's now found that I have countries there. Now, I'm going to make this input parameter, and what type is it going to be? Well, luckily there's this structures tab here. I'm going to come down here and see country is a wide string that's 15 characters long. So I can say wide string, 15 characters long, and we'll give it a value of Mexico. Execute. And we see there it is, all of them in Mexico for the region, or country. I might change this to Brazil. There we go, all of them in Brazil. So, great ability to come in here and edit and test your SQL. Right? Tell you lots of stories about how much of a headache this used to be. So there we go, I've got a query down there. So let's go ahead and put down a data source and point this to that data set. And let's go ahead and do some live binding here. So let's say bind visually. And I've got a query, so let's link this to a new control. And we'll put down a grid. And there's a grid there. Start making it a little bigger. And let's make that query active. So there we go. We've got design time data based on a parameter. So cool, you can do that. So you can't scroll horizontally there. But there it is. Now we also have a DB navigator in here, navigator, called the bind navigator. And we just point that to the data source as well. And our application is almost ready to run. I need to add, so I added the SQL physical driver. Actually, I'll go ahead and run this here, and you'll see the message you get if you forget to include that. So there we go. It's telling us that we need to add the wait cursor. So the wait cursor almost always is going to be in your application, so we just say wait cursor and add it to our application. And there you go. So what these do when you include these is they include the correct units in your application to link the correct files into your project. So you can actually add those units without adding the components, but the components just makes it so much easier and more convenient to include those. So run this again. So there we go. We've got all of our data here. So let's go ahead and change this one here to Mexico. And we'll go ahead and refresh our data, and it's gone. So it's already written back there. I'm not caching it or any local data. This is straight right to the database. So run this again. Let's change our query to say the parameter is a value of Mexico. And set it back to active. And run it again. You see, there we go. There is these that should be Brazil. We'll post this back to the database and refresh. There we go. We fixed the changes we've made there. So FireDAC makes it really easy to connect to your databases. You just got to remember to include these links in here. This is something we've done previously, but the inclusion of the nice dialogues on this makes it much easier to work with your SQL and your connections. So in this example now I've modified our previous demo to make it a master detail. So what I've done is in the master query here, I'm just selecting star from customers. And then I've added a details query. It says select star from customers where customer ID equals, and then parameter for customer ID. Then the master source for this query points to the data source of the master. And when I do that, it automatically adds the master field here of customer ID. So then I just bind it to these two grids. Go ahead and make this active at design time. And we can see it pulling the data in here, so let's go ahead and run this. You see as we browse through customer records, it automatically brings up the orders for that customer. For more information on using FireDAC, visit the FireDAC doc wiki available there. Provides a lot of information. Very extensive documentation is available there. Also, the RAD in action on FireDAC with Carrie Jensen. If you go to that page there, you can register for the upcoming webinar on October 30th, and there's also links to a few other resources, a couple other videos as well there. There's more sessions during CodeRage covering FireDAC, and there's also an interview with Dimitri, the author of AnyDAC, available there, and that's back shortly after the acquisition of AnyDAC by Embarcadero. So some good background information and extensive information on FireDAC. And with that, let's go ahead and go to questions and answers.
Okay, I'm here in the studio with Jim.
Hello again.
Will MySQL support be version agnostic or specific for certain versions? Let's see, mostly or all legacy versions as today in DB Express. Have you looked at, this might be a question for the R&D team about how they're going to handle version specific things. We quote 5.x for MySQL, and I think there was just a 5.7 I thought I saw coming out, so.
Right. I'm not sure on that. That would be the R&D team probably could answer that quite better. I'm just going to look real quick in the doc wiki.
I mean,
the doc wiki has a lot of information on this.
Yeah.
So I would check there and see if it says.
In general, for MySQL or any of the, for FireDAC connectivity, any of the versions, unless you're taking advantage of version-specific SQL extensions that might appear, and FireDAC does support being able to take advantage of platform-specific and version-specific features. If it's general-purpose SQL through FireDAC, just as in DB Express, then it works with multiple versions of the database. And it's just having the right client driver on your machine for MySQL, whether it's for something 5.0, 5.1, 5.5, or whatever. Same with Oracle and others. If there's a client library from the database vendor. I know in Microsoft SQL Server, for example, they made a change. They only support 3 SQL Server versions back in their current MS SQL client DLL. So you have to create a second connection string with the DLL for more than 3 versions ago.
Speaking of SQL Server, I was actually surprised in the doc wiki. It talks about how to do a SQL Server connection from Mac OS 10.
Okay. So
there's a different driver. It's an open source driver you can download. It's not as stable as the SQL Server driver, but it will give you SQL Server connection from OS 10. Of course, the best solution probably would be to use DataSnap and connect through DataSnap to it through Windows host. But that's cool that is supported. Very, very flexible that way.
And again, ultimately, there were several other questions, Jim, about different databases and working, whether it's Advantage Database or Postgres. You still need to look at get the client drivers from the database providers.
Yeah, and
using FireDAC.
And that's the requirement of the database provider for those. A SQLite, you don't need to have those because it's an embedded database. But the other ones that have a client install, you do need to have, or I guess a server install as well. You do need to have the drivers available from them.
And then the physical link, there's a physical link component which makes the connection to that native client driver for the backend database.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Let's see. Using FireDAC and DataSnap, can one easily replicate a subset of server database on a mobile device? Well, client dataset can be a conduit, and it's its own storage system right on mobile, right? Right, Jim?
Right. So you're probably in that situation would use client data set on mobile if you're connecting through DataSnap.
Then you call apply updates, and it takes all the Delta reconciliations and passes them to the DataSnap server, which then formulates SQL update statements and passes them along. And you can use DataSnap with FireDAC,
Right.
just as you would use it with a DB Express database access component.
And so in theory, I'm just trying to think, I haven't done this, but you probably could use the mem table, FireDAC mem table on a mobile device and use that, and then use the SQL scripting against that. I believe the SQL scripting is supported on mobile device. And so then that would give you the ability to run a local mem table that you could persist and then run SQL queries against that mem table on the device. Again, the better solution might be to do maybe install, use SQLite or InterBase to go on that device and then replicate the data through there.
And there was a question Andreas asked: does FireDAC have some notion of using or talking to business objects versus to databases? And I would use DataSnap for that. He's mentioning DevExpress XAF.
I'm not familiar with XAF. FireDAC does have support for talking to, so it's talking to databases, DBMSs.
And data, yeah, or data, in-memory data tables.
Or in-memory data tables. Yeah. But you can talk to either a store procedure, so you could execute a store procedure, and now, for example, in Advantage, that store procedure may actually be a Delphi program running on the server. And so you can then talk to that, and then it can give you back a set of data in return. So might be possibly what you're looking for there. If not, DataSnap's really more of the remote object invocation system. So,
and I knew you met with the Advantage folks. The question here: will FireDAC work with Advantage tables that do not have an external server using local server compiled into the program? I think that's something they're looking at doing.
Yeah, I'm not for sure on that. So,
because they'd have to have a static library. They'd have to have a static library that would work with Delphi to be able to have it linked in to your app bundle on iOS or your APK on Android. That might be. I would ask. I guess James. I would ask them. I'd ask the Advantage folks what their plans are for local database support through a static library that could be linked, and then use the driver connection somehow. I mean, we do that in InterBase and IB2Go on iOS and Android. But we statically link in the library for InterBase access into your executable, and then you can still use just FireDAC components talking to InterBase, and it knows that wherever the database is, if it's local, then it knows how to get to it, and the client library is linked into your application.
Yeah, the Advantage guys, they're on board as far as supporting XE5 and moving forward, so they'll be able to give you an answer to that probably.
And again, all the demos that Jim did, you could build the same demos for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. FireDAC works on all 4 platforms.
Yep, it does exactly, and it's going to work almost exactly the same, except for, as I mentioned, only certain databases are available for mobile with FireDAC.
And Matus, he mentioned AnyDAC. FireDAC is included, is what we call it now. That's FireDAC, and when you buy the product, either by, if you want to talk to remote databases, you buy the client server pack or you buy the enterprise product. In the professional, you can talk to local databases, so SQLite, InterBase, desktop version, IBLite, InterBase to go locally.
I believe it'll do SQL Express as well in the local version. So actually the Pro version of FireDAC, the edition available Pro, has actually got a lot of features. Really the only limitation is the talking to the remote servers. So even the mem table, all that stuff is in the Pro version. So that's a very cool that's all available to you there.
And if you're not sure, go to the feature matrix and look down the columns of the different editions to see in the database section to see what's supported in each of the editions. Can I configure my apps to make FireDAC work with databases in the cloud? If you can log in and connect to the database directly.
Yeah, if you should, if you have a connection, if that cloud database is exposing a connection to you, then yes. If I don't remember anything about like SQL Server Azure using that specifically, but if it's if you're running an Amazon instance remote instance and want to connect to that, and you've exposed that correctly, then you should be able to connect to that. I would believe. But then at that point, you are exposing your database connection over the internet. So that would be a time you'd want to look at using DataSnap. Would be a more secure, more flexible solution for that.
Let's see. Does FireDAC work with Oracle 11G? And I guess there's a 12C. On the doc wiki, again, you can look at the doc wiki. There's a specific doc wiki for FireDAC, and also what Oracle specific features. So look for articles. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't see it. I was looking to say what the doc wiki says, but I'm going to say yes. That I'm pretty sure it does, but I'm not positive. And the reason I'm saying that is because there is DB Express does support that, and FireDAC can use DB Express to connect to a database, or you can use ODBC, and I'm almost positive that it's going to work with the Oracle native driver. I just didn't install and test that, so
that'd be a good thing, Joe. I mean, you could, if you've got Oracle, some version of Oracle, I know they're up to 12C now, which allows you to put Oracle in the cloud. I use the 11 driver, and we have Oracle 10 on a server here, and so I test. But again, look at the doc wiki for FireDAC. It lists all the different versions and releases and what you can do for specific database operations and extensions. That's documented there. Let's see. So Dave is asking about DB Express. We're still supporting DB Express, but really the future is FireDAC.
Yep, and as JT pointed out this morning, even the BDE is still shipping in XE5. Yep. Although the BDE, we are highly encouraging you to move on, especially FireDAC is now everything you need. You don't need the BDE anymore. But
yeah, it's auto update caching. So the BDE way of moving off a row and automatic updating. FireDAC, you can set an option to do automatic updating whenever you make changes to data in a row, for example.
Yeah. There's really very little. I can't think of anything that the FireDAC doesn't have the BDE did.
And DataSnap is absolutely recommended for multi-tier. I think, Dave, you might be confusing that DataSnap uses a part of DB Express, only the connection, the SQL connection component. It doesn't use DB Express as it relates to anything to do with database access. It's using the DBX framework, parts of the framework, to do some of the DataSnap work. But over time, there'll be a complete separation, but DataSnap still works. The fact they're using T-SQL connection for DataSnap driver has nothing to do with using the rest of DB Express or database-specific connections. It's only reusing part of the framework. And again, that will be changed over time. So DataSnap is usable, absolutely, in XE5 and for years to come. It is our multi-tier strategy, and also your way to talk from mobile to remote databases. Can you use FireDAC to create databases and tables? And yes, there are interfaces for creating, for doing all sorts of things.
Yep, you can use FireDAC to execute SQL commands. There's a I think it's TFT command is the name of the component, and you can put your SQL statement in there to execute a command to create a table. And then there's another one that lets you execute a series of SQL statements. So if you have like a script that you want to run against the server to recreate a database from scratch and populate with data, whatever, you can do that as well through that specific component.
Yeah, Richard's asking about should he use mem tables with FireDAC or use client data set? And they're two different animals, right?
They're two different animals. There's pros and cons of each. It depends on what you're going to do with it, and that's probably not something I'm going to be able to answer here over this.
Yeah, we can always point. I mean, mem tables are literally what they say. You get your selection set. They get put in you have them in a mem table. You can add elements to them, and they sit there in memory. Mm-hmm. And then you have the benefit of assigning mem tables to each other and assigning, there are data sets, you can assign them to client data set. Client data set is based on the Midas technology, so it has things like filters. You can save the data out to just with a save to file, yep, either XML, UTF-8, or binary, which is this sort of MyBase internal binary format. So client data set has some of that capability, aggregations like sum and so on. Memtable, you can do everything you would do with a data set, but I don't think I don't remember if there was a save to file option for Memtable.
Yeah, I don't recall save to file. Then also, you do have the ability to run the local SQL script against your Memtable as, yep, well with FireDAC.
Yep.
So if you're in FireDAC, I would look at memtable first, and then if there's something specific you need, then you could go to the
client data
set. And there is that webinar later this month with Kerry Jensen, and he is like the client data set master, and he would be able to answer that question probably.
Yeah, so he's going to be talking about everything data set, database as well. I think that's towards the end of October.
October 30th.
And Kerry has a client data set session here during CodeRage 8 as well. And so you can log into that one and then ask him those questions. We'll watch the time here. Let's see. I started using FMX desktop apps. I'm trouble with on-click events button and only work double clicks. Now, on-click does on-click when you click on it. So, Elazar, if you're having trouble, look at your event handler.
Yeah, I haven't had any of that trouble with them.
64-bit access chemo. FireDAC supports 64-bit. It supports 32-bit. It runs on 32 and 64-bit Windows, 32-bit OS 10, and then on iOS and Android with ARM.
Yeah, it'll run on 64-bit OS 10, but it's a 32-bit application on a 64-bit OS operating system.
Let's see. Can FireDAC be extended with UDFs on mobile? Well, I don't know how you create a UDF on mobile because UDFs are usually stored in dynamic libraries.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah.
Try it and see what happens. Let me know.
DB ISAM is written in Delphi embedded in application. SenloDB. I mean, there's no specific FireDAC support for DB ISAM.
Yeah.
If there's an ODBC driver.
Yeah, the DB ISAM server does have an
Windows.
ODBC driver. But as far as
ODBC is Windows, and he wanted to have this on a mobile device.
So I know that DB ISAM had a Linux version when Kylix was out that was different. And so I'm going to guess that because of the low-level nature of the way it works, it's OS specific. And you're going to have to talk to Elevate to see if they do have support for it.
Okay.
And I do believe they've actually deprecated DB ISAM, which I loved DB ISAM, use it all the time, and to have a new system now, and I can't remember what it's called, and they might have a mobile story coming up with that one.
Okay. And Matus asks, can I save all the records from client data set to a file on Android and iOS? Yes. Save to file. And then you give it a file name, and you give it the type. If you don't give it the second parameter, then it stores it as binary format locally, and then you can reload it. That's the whole briefcase model of connect, disconnect, shut down your mobile device, and so on. And Mikhail is saying FireDAC works with Oracle 11 and 12. So
okay.
Thanks, Mikhail.
Thank you. Yep.
Let's see. Which version of Android is supported by XE5 and which devices? The Doc Wiki lists all of those. Jelly Bean, Ice Cream Sandwich, and
Gingerbread.
And Gingerbread are the three.
Honeycomb's not supported, but it's like 0.1% of the platform.
Are the different Android. And then the devices on Android must be ARM7 and have the Neon instruction set support. So we have a Doc Wiki. You can search for it. That lists all the devices that we've been testing on that work, and some that may have a certain issue along the way.
And I saw I think it was Australian Delphi Users Group is doing a huge survey of people's devices to find out what devices people have and what they work with. And from what the research I've done shows that the majority of devices that are out there running Android will work with XE5. I have a couple devices that won't because they're like, Android 2 for
there's some older devices in Africa and so on that again don't have the Neon.
Yep. And I have a non-Neon tablet as well.
Yeah. Giovanni asked, is there a conversion tool for renaming AD prefix? Yes, there is. There's utility in XE5 that'll convert all of the component names to be FD instead of AD.
Yep. And I was just talking with somebody that said they have a case study about that conversion process. If I get that, I'll try and get that posted on my blog.
Okay. Okay, Tim, the agenda for CodeRage is on the website. Just go to www.embarcadero.com/CodeRage, and you'll see the agenda for all the sessions for the 3 days. Okay. Just watching the time so we can get back on schedule. Okay. 64-bit Microsoft Access and FireDAC. If you build a 64-bit app, you should be able to access 64-bit MS Access.
It might not. I'm not sure because it's going to be going through the driver for access, and if the driver allows a 32-bit app to talk to it, that might work as well.
Yeah.
So you have to test that. I believe it. I would expect it to work because I had the 64-bit SQL Server installed. I was talking to it from 32-bit app.
Scott mentioned there is a save to file for TFDM table.
Oh,
cool.
Excellent.
And then just take a look at the method and see what format it saves it. Okay. Elevate's new database platform is called Elevate DB.
Elevate DB, that's correct.
Okay.
It had a lot of cool new features on it. I was just really used to the DBI SAM.
And then Ewan, or I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, the DataSnap team is working on optimizations and performance improvements for DataSnap. So stay tuned for.
There were some improvements in XE5. I know Marco, I can't remember if he's has a session talked about some of the best practices, or there will be white paper coming out soon about that, as far as things you can do to, because DataSnap's still flexible, it's easy to write something that's going to be slow, and it's easy to write something that's going to be fast, and it's a matter of testing and knowing the best way to do that. So,
okay, and then that's most of them. If I missed one, Jim's got other sessions throughout CodeRage, and so we can catch up on some of those. Yeah, FD Query has save to file and save to stream, and again, it's their format, not CDS format. So. Yeah. So you can take a look and see what that is, obviously, to stream it out and bring it back in again to the TFD mem table.